Hello and welcome to Duxbury Foundations, where to start with Duxbury Braille Translator. And I am actually going to turn you over to DeJute. She works here at APH. She is a mastermind of Braille. It's probably one of her favorite codes in the world. And she is going to tell you those foundational knowledge things about Duxbury. Kyle, take it away.
Thanks, Leanne. Let's do it and talk about those groundings of Duxbury. I am Kyle DeJute. There's a picture of me up on the screen. I'm a white woman with short, curly brown hair. And in the picture on the screen, there is a little human looking over my shoulder. That's my 5-year-old, now 5-year-old, who is often home with me, if you can imagine, during these times. So that little one definitely makes their way into my profile picture. My title at APH is Braille Trainer. Like Leanne said, I really like Braille. I think it's cool, and I try to know a lot about it and a lot about some of the tools we can use to make it, which is why we're here today to talk about Duxbury. First of all, I want to clear the air about a couple of things. Some of the things we are not talking about today, or that you don't have to do today. You don't have to know all of the codes or all of the styles. You don't have to know everything. So if I do something and it doesn't make sense to you, or I just pull something out of the air that I have memorized, please give yourself space to know I had to look it up for many years. It's okay to have to look things up and not know everything. We're not going to cover all the possible ways to interact with Duxbury, sort of like any software program with a broad user base. There are lots of different ways to use the program and to get files in and put files out. So we're not going to cover every single way you could use it, which is another way of saying the way you use the program is not necessarily wrong if it is not exactly what we are outlining today. What we are outlining today is a fair bit of information, so we won't have much opportunity to pause or go back. I know that we are collecting comments and questions from the chat, and certainly after this presentation, we will comb through those to make sure that we respond as completely and widely to those as we can. So in this presentation, the first part, we're going to be talking about file types, and I'm going to use some tools and mention some things that we will examine in further detail farther on in the presentation. So if, as we're talking about file types, I do something and you feel like it whizzed by and you're reaching out after it going, wait, what did you just say? What did you just do? Please feel comfortable that we are very likely to return to the thing that you just get a glimpse of in the first part of this presentation. All right, on a more positive note, the things we are going to do today are identify 3 file types in Duxbury Braille Translator, which is also abbreviated DBT, and which I am very likely to call simply Duxbury. Technically, Duxbury is the name of the company, which has a couple of programs. And today we're talking about Duxbury Braille Translator. So if I just call it Duxbury, that's what I mean. We are going to define 4 key terms for thinking and talking about Duxbury and using it. Those are character style, paragraph style, code, and template. And last, but far from least, we're going to locate and explain the very important setting, read formatted Braille without interpretation. Without further ado, the file types in Duxbury. Let's talk first about a file type you might see most often, which is the Braille Ready file, the BRF. So this file in Duxbury doesn't have any codes or styles, which we could think of as instructions for Duxbury or sets of instructions. It doesn't have any of those. A BRF consists just of spaces, line breaks, like an enter at the end of a line, page breaks, and ASCII characters. So those are just the characters that correspond to individual Braille cell configurations. And that's it. That's all that a simple BRF has in it. So a BRF is often the file type that we send to an embosser because it is made up just of these sort of rigid spaces and line breaks that get the Braille exactly where we're going to see it on the embossed page. So our BRF is often our finished file type, what we send to the embosser. A BRF, since it has none of these Duxbury codes or styles, it is easily read by other software programs, including other Braille translation software programs, as well as text editors like Notepad. So Notepad could even have been a BRF because it's just the characters that correspond to Braille cells, the ASCII characters, the page breaks, line breaks, and hard spaces. On the screen now are two screenshots of a BRF that's been opened through Duxbury. On the left is our Braille with no codes showing. So this is the simulated Braille that looks a lot like where the dots are going to be raised on our embossed page. And over on the right, very interestingly, is a BRF that's been opened through Duxbury. And we have the codes showing, and all we see are little spaces, which are represented by a print straight apostrophe that's inside square brackets. And if you're looking at the screen, it's in a sort of grayish, tannish box. So those are just spaces. And then we have the line breaks. And if we scrolled farther down in this BRF file with codes showing, we would see page breaks. And that's it. No more complicated instructions in the BRF. Another way to open this file we kind of touched on, if you were to open this file, a BRF file, through Notepad, then this is kind of what you would see, which is some spaced over ASCII characters that correspond to Braille cells. I think in another webinar, we're going to talk about how Braille works electronically and certainly touch on the question of if you had something like a BRF, you were opening through a text editor or in a web browser. Especially if you are a sighted Braille user or Braille editor, how can you see those as Braille cells? But if you just straight up open a BRF through Notepad, it opens fine, and we just see ASCII print characters. Another Duxbury Braille file type is DXP, or a Duxbury Print file. This file does include codes and styles, those instructions and sets of instructions for Duxbury. The Duxbury Print is made up, the content is made up of print letters, a lot like a Word or PDF file has the same content. This Duxbury Print is going to have the same print that really looks like print, not just those print characters that correspond to Braille cells. Our Duxbury Print, I would say, is our most flexible working file in Duxbury. So that's the reason that on the screen there's a picture of rippling water. Much like water, a Duxbury Print file can sort of fit into different shapes and vessels because it is our most flexible working file within Duxbury. The Duxbury Print is a Duxbury file, so I wouldn't open one of these via Notepad. A Duxbury Print, DXP, should be opened through and edited with Duxbury. So here are a couple of screenshots of a Duxbury Print file open. When it is translated and no codes are shown, it's the exact same file that our BRF showed us. And if we look at just the Duxbury Print with codes showing, you can see the actual content of our file is the text exactly as it would look in a print book. So we have the letters EXCERPT, excerpt, and so on from Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. Also in this Duxbury print, we've got some styles, paragraph styles like ref page number, which is a set of code instructions for Duxbury saying, hey, what's in here is a print page number. And we also have some codes, again, in those square brackets. We have maybe a code FTE tilde-I, which is the partner code to this FTS tilde-I. More on those italics codes later. And that's our Duxbury print view in Duxbury with codes on, right? We have those codes and styles and the print content of the document we're working with. Let's pause to give you an opportunity to respond to a poll. The question is, which DBT file type has more editing flexibility? Your options are A, BRF, it should be B, DXP, or C, DOT. Which of those is the Duxbury file type with more editing flexibility?
And the poll is actually coming through, and you're welcome to write in the chat as well. And we are at about 60%. So to keep us going, I'm going to end the poll. Share the results. Most people picked DXP overwhelmingly by 95%.
I'm so glad that you're listening. Absolutely. The Duxbury print file is, I would say, our most flexible file working within Duxbury. We said there were 3 file types. We hadn't talked about this third yet. It's the DXB, Duxbury Braille file. This one, like a Duxbury print file, does include codes and styles, instructions to Duxbury. The Duxbury Braille file includes the ASCII characters that correspond to Braille cells, and they are by default shown in the SimBraille font. So this is the visible Braille font that's proprietary to Duxbury. In this way, the Duxbury Braille file differs from the Duxbury print file because the Duxbury Braille file consists only of these Braille cells, which were generated either by 6-key entry or when the Duxbury Braille file was created from a print file. So the Duxbury Braille file, in order to have the same print that looks like it does in the print book, and not those characters that correspond to Braille cells, it would have to be back translated. And I suspect that most of you are doing what I do and you shudder at the idea of back translation. So the Duxbury Braille file type loses a lot of flexibility because it only has these ASCII characters that correspond to Braille cells, and it doesn't actually have the print content sort of as the content was created in a print file. The Duxbury Braille file, it can be your working file in Duxbury. Like we said, it has those codes and styles and certainly more flexibility than a BRF. But really, the Duxbury Braille file can only be your working file in a single code. You couldn't uncontract a Duxbury Braille file because it doesn't have print from which to make that different translation. Or conversely, if you have a totally uncontracted Duxbury Braille file, you couldn't make a contracted file from that unless you back translated to a print file first. So in short, a Duxbury Braille file could be a working file just in that one single code. You're stuck there. Like the Duxbury print, the Duxbury Braille file is a Duxbury file type, and so is best opened through and edited with Duxbury. On the screen are a couple of screenshots of a Duxbury Braille file that has been opened and shown in Duxbury. Our Braille looks exactly the same as it did when we had our translated DXP or our BRF with codes off. And then our view with codes showing shows us some style, some paragraph styles like ref page number and end ref page number, as well as body text and left flush. You might note here that there are not those italic codes that we noticed in the DXP file. And that's because this Duxbury Braille file was created from a Duxbury Print file, which had those italic codes. And now the effect of those italic codes is to have an italic word indicator before misses and an italic word indicator before Dalloway. So those codes are no longer in the file. They've done their job and been gotten rid of. They've generated these Braille characters, and there is no longer that code in this Duxbury Braille file. Let's pause our slide for a moment and take a look at these file types in action in Duxbury. So I have my Duxbury program window open. I'm going to go to File, New. I could have pressed Control N, and I get this question about what file type. I will in a moment. I have this question about first what document type I want to make. I want to make a print, a Duxbury Print file. And my default template is English UEB BANA. So this has the translation table for UEB, which is obviously based on the language of English. And the formatting and whatnot is based on rules from Braille Authority of North America. Don't worry, we're going to talk more about templates later. So I've made my new print file, and maybe I want to type something like, Kyle could use more coffee. Do you want more coffee? And that's all I have for now. If I Control T or File Translate, I get some Braille, and I've got, I hope it's correct. Kyle could, short form, yes, or contracted in UEB, use more coffee. Do you want more coffee? Question mark. Okay, you ready for something mind-blowing and very important to the foundations of Duxbury? I'm going to go up to my little file level controls for the window and restore down. So this is not my Duxbury level restore down, minimize, or close. This is my file level restore down, making that window small. It's a whole separate file, this Duxbury Braille file that I just made. It is totally separate from and now unconnected to the Duxbury Print file. If I messed around inside my Duxbury Braille file and deleted half of it, that has no effect on the content of my Duxbury Print file. And if I mess around in my Duxbury Print file and add more, that has no effect on my Duxbury Braille file. You might notice my Duxbury Braille file, if you're looking at the screen, is showing things very small right now. I'm going to change my view so that it isn't showing a full Braille page. So under View, unclick Full Page, and then it goes to my default settings for font size. Let's pause for a minute so I can make a slightly cynical, hopefully helpful observation about Duxbury. Duxbury Braille Translator is not the most beautiful program you've ever seen. Duxbury Braille Translator has never been designed to have a bells and whistles, bright colors, huge displays user interface. So you can change some of these settings of your font sizes in your default views of Duxbury, but you are not alone if you find the Duxbury user interface not the most beautiful that you've ever seen. So for our file types, let's say I actually realize I need some bold on this word more. Kyle could use more coffee. Well, we just looked at how my file types are unconnected, so I can't change that in my Duxbury Braille file. In fact, I'm just going to toss it away. It's let me look at the Braille and do what I need to. I'm just getting rid of it. I'm not saving any changes. I'm going back to my working, flexible Duxbury Print file. And here I want to add bold to the word more. I can do that by entering the codes font type start and bold. This is a lot like the FTS tilde I that we saw earlier, which was font type start italic. This would be font type start bold. We hit OK. We will talk more about codes. I can also then end my bold. And if I file, translate, I get a new, totally separate Duxbury Braille file, which has the word more bold. If I'm totally happy with this Braille, I could file and save as a webinar game. Now let's call it a webinar adventure. And then change my type under Save As Type to Formatted Braille. USA encoding BRF is your best choice. There is an option for local encoding, and most of us are only ever going to need the USA encoding if the person you're sending stuff to has trouble reading the BRF. Perhaps local encoding is an option, but I've never seen that be necessary. So formatted Braille USA encoding is our file type. We're saving a BRF. And now if I went to File, Open, and opened up that BRF, Braille Ready file that I just saved, it'll ask me, it'll see that this is formatted Braille. Don't worry, we'll look at that again. And hit OK. Now I have that file open. And if I show codes, we're seeing a BRF style of codes here where we just have these hard spaces, hard line breaks. And if we had more text, more than one Braille page worth of text, we would have a page break code as well. While we're talking about file types, I need to admit something to you or pull your awareness to something. Here in the top of the program window, my file name is webinaradventure.dxb. But hold on a minute. I opened Webinar Adventure BRF. Did I open the wrong file? What's going on? So I have never seen the file extension BRF in the program window of Duxbury. As soon as a file is open in Duxbury, it can be edited, and it is open through Duxbury. It is a Duxbury Braille file. So as soon as you open a BRF through Duxbury, it's going to display the file name with the DXB file type. So any changes I make in here don't automatically save to my BRF. If I needed to replace that BRF, I would need to file save as again. But I wouldn't really be making changes to this BRF, right? It's not a good, flexible, editable file in Duxbury. If I want to make changes, I really only want to make them in my flexible, editable Duxbury Print file type. Clones and evil scientists. We are the evil scientists. The clones are the Duxbury Braille files. So you're working along in your Duxbury Print file, and you want to know what Braille you're going to get from that. You want to see you got to see the whole thing, right? So you translate or Control T, and you look at your Duxbury Braille file. When you've gotten the information that you want from it, did my bold apply correctly? How is this being centered on the line because of this style, like a heading style that I applied? Once you've gotten that information about the Braille, you close out that Duxbury Braille file and toss it aside. You don't save it anywhere. You don't need it. It's just a glimpse. So we're like the evil scientists creating a clone and then just tossing them aside. Create another clone for experimentation. Look at what Duxbury is giving me for a Braille file from my Duxbury Print file. And once I've gotten the information that I need from it, like a cackling evil scientist, I just toss it aside and return to my working Duxbury Print file. So every time we translate or Control T, we create a new clone, a new Duxbury Braille file, which is separate and totally disconnected from the Duxbury Print file it came from. And when we're done reviewing the Duxbury Braille file, we can just toss it aside and return to our working Duxbury Print file. I want to be scrupulously honest and clear here in your Braille translation. I'm not trying to say that DXP DXB, and BRF are the only file types you're ever going to encounter or need. You're certainly going to encounter other file types like PDFs that get shared for print, or even better, DOCX files that get shared as your print source file. If you're working with a textbook especially, you might get an XML file, ideally from the NIMAS file, which are administrated by the NIMAC, which is the National Instructional Materials Access Center. And you can get these often beautifully styled and marked up print files for textbooks through the NIMAC. And of course, there are more file types. Again, I'm not trying to tell you that Duxbury file types are the only ones that you need to know about or that you will ever encounter, but I am trying to tell you those 3 file types are the ones that are foundational to Duxbury. Now it's time for another poll. I feel like I have to do that Vanna White motion when there's a poll. Which of the following lists the 3 Duxbury Braille Translator file types? Your options are A, BRL, PRT, DOT. B is beep, bop, boop. Option C, BRF, DXP, DXB, or option D, DXP, ABT, BRF.
Kyle, you have lots of answers in the chat, but you also have great answers in the poll. We're over 60%, so I'm going to end the poll and share out those results. We have an overwhelming BRF, DXP, and DXB at 99%.
You're so right. You're just so right. Those are the 3 Duxbury file types in Duxbury Braille Translator. So to review, I would say Duxbury Print files are the most editable Duxbury file type. Duxbury Braille files are also editable, but not as flexible as a DXP because they're made up of those ASCII characters that correspond to Braille cells. And a BRF, which, as far as editing are concerned, are very rigid, most often used for production and sharing back and forth of Braille files because they don't take up a lot of memory, because they don't have a lot of instructions in them. BRF files can even be opened by software programs that aren't for Braille translation at all. All right, our next foundational piece is codes. I've said it a couple of times. The codes are essentially instructions for Duxbury Braille Translator. They tell Duxbury Braille Translator what to do, like go to a new Braille page here. Make this next thing a superscript. The documentation from Duxbury, or the help file for Duxbury, talks about codes in part like this. All word processors use some form of markup codes, which may or may not be visible to you, the user. And those markup codes determine how a page element, like a word, is displayed and printed. One example is, let's say I have the word bold in bold. What that looks like in the background with those markup codes is something like what's shown in blue here. Span style equal, quote, font hyphen weight colon bold, and the actual text that's bold, and a little code preceded by a slash that says span. That's the end of what's bold. The help file goes on to say, DBT likewise uses codes, but its codes relate to how your Braille is translated and formatted. Some code examples include PG, which will force a new Braille page, the opening angle bracket, or the less than sign. So that is a line break, a Braille line break. The closing angle bracket, this is not a very common code, really. It corresponds to a tab. It is essentially like pushing the tab key to go over to the right some certain amount in your document. I included it in this list because I didn't want to tell you that the less than sign or the opening angle bracket is a code for a Braille line, and then just leave you hanging. I wanted to also make it clear that if you do see this greater than or closing angle bracket code in your file when you view codes, that's a tab. Another code is FTS_I. This code does work, especially in the English UEB BANA template, and could be described as font type start tilde italics are the font type that we want to start. Its corollary is FTE tilde I, which would end the font type italics. Yes, there are codes for this that are FTS tilde B for bold, tilde S for script, tilde numeral 1 for the first transcriber defined type form. Guys, there are a lot of codes. Another code example is G1, which tells Duxbury, hey, what comes after this code is uncontracted, or in grade 1 Braille. And more. There are lots of codes because there are lots of things that we can tell Duxbury to do. Happily, some of these codes are packaged into paragraph styles, which are sort of sets of codes that give instructions to Duxbury. Okay, but if there are lots of codes, how do you even know them? One really useful source is the DBT Codes Quick Reference. This is part of the in-program help file or Duxbury documentation. This is also in that same documentation online. And the DBT Codes Quick Reference is a full list of Duxbury codes organized alphabetically by what the content of the actual code is. So like FTS tilde I comes in the F part of the alphabet in this alphabetical listing of DBT codes. And with each listing in the DBT Codes Quick Reference, there's a description of what the code does, often including a related code that you can link to and see what it does as well. This is a really useful resource for knowing what DBT codes exist and what DBT codes might get the program to do what you need it to do. It's also true that some Duxbury Braille codes have been organized into the Braille tab in Word. This Braille tab is particularly useful for the BANA templates for Duxbury. And the Braille tab automatically appears in Word after the program Swift has been installed. So we're not here today to talk about using Word with Duxbury, but I think it's worth noting that the Swift program from Duxbury is free and is designed to make it easier for you to use Microsoft Word, especially to prepare a Duxbury file, prepare a Word file for importation into Duxbury. Swift makes that Braille tab appear in Word. And then, as with so many skills and softwares, sharing with our peers, experimenting, and learning more about the codes is also how you know about Duxbury Braille codes. So on the screen now are two screenshots of a table. One of them is the resulting Braille. It's just spaces in the simulated Braille font applied to ASCII characters. And then the other picture is of the Duxbury Print file that this lovely Braille layout came from, where I made a table using some Duxbury codes, among which are CTB, which is basically clear tabs. Any other tab information that you had earlier, just forget about it. And then I set the indentation for each, the first tab and the second tab and the third tab. As much as I would nerdily like to go through every code that's in here, it's really just for us to glance at and say, woo, that table took a lot of codes to make everything move over the way that we wanted it to and be editable later. We've talked about codes a couple of times. How do you know what codes are happening? We want to view codes when we change things in Duxbury. So that brings up our square brackets as well as our angle brackets around paragraph styles that are in the tannish, greenish grayish boxes in Duxbury. We can view codes by pressing Alt F3. And a word to the wise for us laptop users, if your function keys have primary functions, but then they can be F keys if you hold down the FN key. In order to press Alt F3 on a lot of laptops, you have to hold down the function key, then press Alt and the F3. If I just pushed F3 without holding down the function key on my laptop, it would make the volume louder. And yes, I've done that and blown out my headphones going, why can't I show the codes in Duxbury? I just want to push Alt F3. But I forgot to hold down my function key to make that key actually F3. We can also view codes by simply going into the View drop-down menu and pressing Codes. And both of those are a toggle. So if we click it once, it'll probably turn on. And if we click it again, it'll hide the codes. And again, it'll bring them back. And again, it'll hide them, so on and so forth, back and forth. How do we get those codes into our Duxbury Braille file? So I did this quickly earlier when we made more in Kyle Needs More Coffee. When I made it bold, I inserted the code by pressing Control open square bracket, and that brings up that little pop-up box, and you type a code in there and then hit OK. You can also insert codes under the Layout drop-down menu or by pressing F9. That brings up that same box into which you type the code, which perhaps you found in the beautiful and extensive DBT Codes Quick Reference. I want to make sure we get to everything, so we're not going to go look at that in the program right now. Our next key concept is styles. So there are essentially two types of styles in Duxbury. Paragraph styles, which affect page level formatting, like how far something is going to be indented. And there are character styles, which essentially affect symbol level formatting, whether a word or a letter or a series of words is going to be bold or italic or perhaps uncontracted. On the screen currently, there's an example with a heading centered paragraph style and some italic character styles. On the screen, they're beautiful, bold colors, which I accomplished with highlighting in the picture. These beautiful pink and yellow, which indicate the opening and closing character style, or green and red, which indicate the opening and closing paragraph style. Yeah, those colors are not native to Duxbury. I just got them by editing this screenshot. They do highlight some important characteristics of paragraph and character styles. First, character styles happen inside, or they at least fit inside a paragraph style. So if you want to make something italic, something can be italic within an indented paragraph, or within a list, or within a line of poetry, or within a heading. So character styles can fit inside a paragraph style. Let's go ahead and do a poll. You've been really with me so far, so I have every faith in your ability to answer this one. What is the term for what we have called instructions for Duxbury? Codes, modes, directions, or swift?
And as soon as I see it hit high, I am going to share those results. They're coming in really fast. And I am going to share out those results. We have 97% said codes.
That's absolutely right. Codes are essentially instructions for Duxbury. We were talking about styles. What's in a paragraph style? Information given in a paragraph style, like body text or heading centered or list, is where the first line in that paragraph starts, as well as where succeeding lines might go. So if you've got an indented paragraph, the body text style, or in some templates, body style, says the first line of this chunk of text that has the paragraph style starts in cell 3. And when that chunk of text needs to take up more Braille lines, those more or run over Braille lines start in cell 1. Paragraph styles often also include information in the form of codes because paragraph styles are made up of codes. And you can see what codes make up a paragraph style in modify style. It's a dangerous place to be sometimes because you don't want to actually modify the style, but I just feel like you deserve that nugget of information. Paragraph styles are made up of codes. They give this kind of information, and you can see what codes make up a paragraph style under modify style. Paragraph styles also will often include information about protection. So this doesn't mean paying the mafia to not burn down your restaurant. Protection in this case has to do with how many lines of text are kept on the same Braille page with this chunk of text with a certain paragraph style, or perhaps how many blank lines occur before or after it, and if those get kept with the chunk of text on a new Braille page. And more. There can be more code information in the set of codes that is a paragraph style. We could give more information about what translation table, like what code is used to transcribe the print in a paragraph style, potentially other things as well. So paragraph styles are made up of a family of instructions to Duxbury Braille Translator. In other words, paragraph styles are made up of a set of codes. How can you tell if something is a paragraph style or a character style? Paragraph style names end with a period. Character style names have no period at their ends. In our displays, I don't know if you remember, but styles as opposed to codes were enclosed in those angle brackets. So for example, with these periods, for the paragraph style H3, which appears in some templates, or if you're using the English UEB BANA template, you might see the paragraph style H3-heading cell 7, period. You might also see the character styles, bold or uncontracted. Again, character style names have no period at their end, and paragraph style names have periods at their ends. It's time for another check-in poll. True or false? Oh no, well, the answer is given away on the slide, but I'm sure you'll figure it out. When you edit a Duxbury Braille file, the Duxbury Print file changes as well.
And you're right, you gave the answer away. Go
I
ahead.
didn't need to. Yeah, so it's false because our file types in Duxbury are separate and unconnected. If you edit the Duxbury Braille file, that doesn't change anything about the Duxbury Print file, and vice versa. If you edit a Duxbury Print file, that has no effect on any existing Duxbury Braille file. Separate files in Duxbury Braille Translator are all unconnected. How do we get those styles? We know how to tell apart a paragraph and a character style. Where do they come from when we want to put them in to a file in Duxbury? Well, there's a bunch of styles under our layout drop-down menu. We choose apply style. We get this lovely pop-up box with a list of styles. That same pop-up box, list of styles, is brought up with F8. So if I bring up my Duxbury file, let's say I have this print file. It's a few pages. That's an excerpt from Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. It's just a couple of paragraphs. The first paragraph is left flush. Other ones are indented. It's on print pages 68, 69, and 70. And in the very last paragraph, the phrase "were all her fault" has her italicized. So if I were translating this using Duxbury, I might bring up my Word file that I have hidden way down in some folders for no good reason. So I might bring up the Word file that, let's say, my teacher or person that I'm doing the work for sent me. They sent me the actual Word file that they used to create that pretty excerpt from Mrs. Dalloway. And when I go to File, Open, and I select, let's do it again, and I select that file, Mrs. Dalloway excerpt, and open, I get this pop-up Import File menu, which asks, what template do you want to use? We're going to talk about templates next. I think the most useful one for most of us is the English UEB BANA. That's my default template. And Duxbury has already noticed what I'm trying to import is either an open XML or a Word 2007 style file. So this is a Word file, and this is the import filter I want is the Word 2007. So Duxbury has given me the text, and it already has some paragraph styles like body text, and that ends here, applied. The excerpt from Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, that's the title of this document. That's the heading. So I have a little soft return here, L. I don't really want that. I'm happy to not determine my line breaks ahead of time. I want all my text to be without soft returns. And I want this to be a heading. So how do I apply that paragraph style? Go to Layout, Apply Style, and right there in the drop-down menu, it reminds me I could push F8. If I were on my laptop, I would have to hold down the function key to press F8. Then in this list of styles, some of which are paragraph styles, we can see because they end with a period. Some of which are character styles, we can see because they do not end with the period. In here, we have in the H, I'm going to type the letter H to go to this part of the list. We have the style H1 hyphen heading centered, and that ends with a period because it's a paragraph style. I'm going to hit OK. Now my excerpt from Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway is a heading. And my other paragraphs are body text. Actually, I noticed in print, right, that first paragraph is left flush, is a blocked paragraph. And I really should, certainly according to BANA formatting rules, I should push F8 and apply maybe the paragraph style left flush to make that a blocked paragraph. If we like, I can Control T or File Translate and create a clone where I'll take a glance at what I have. I notice I have a blank line right at the beginning of my transcription before the centered heading. That's the first thing. I don't need that blank line at the top of the Braille page. So thanks, clone. Go away. I never want to see you again. I learned what I needed, which is, oh, look, I have an SK1 code at the beginning of this file. I bet that was giving me that extra blank line. Control T, new clone. Now my centered heading is at the very top of my page and I'm into it. So again, we apply those paragraph styles by maybe pressing F8 or Layout, Apply Style, and that brings up our Apply Style box from which we can choose the style that we want. Okay. I've got to say a word about that translated line that happens in Duxbury, right? Sometimes we see it highlighted in yellow at the very bottom of the screen. That tries to give you some idea of what the corresponding Braille or print is for the line that your cursor is in. However, we know that there are paragraph styles which affect big blocks of text that take up multiple Braille lines. And we know that there are passage indicators which also affect big blocks of text that take up multiple Braille lines. So we really have to take that translated line with a grain or multiple grains of salt and not take it at face value. The best way to see the Braille that will result from your working Duxbury print file is to create a clone or Control T and create a whole Duxbury Braille file, which will show you what Braille is actually going to come from the full effect of codes, styles, and indicators in your Duxbury Print file. All right, here's our last foundational piece, templates. The Duxbury documentation has this to say about templates in part. A template is a skeleton for the document that provides the structure for translation and formatting. So when we open a file and we do that thing where we choose a template, we say we want a Duxbury Print type, and I want it according to this template, we're setting the skeleton upon which the rest of our transcription will be built. And that skeleton includes, or that template includes, information about which Duxbury Braille Translator translation table to use. So the translation table is the set of rules and instructions that Duxbury references or looks things up in about what Braille to make from the print we have. A translation table provides the rules for what Braille comes from the print that Duxbury is given. In a template, there can be information about which translation table to use, for example, UEB or Nemeth code, or historically English Braille American Edition, or similar. And in a template, there can be information about the main translation table, as well as sometimes a secondary translation table. One clear example of a template having information about a main and secondary translation table is the UEB with Nemeth transcription, which has UEB as its main translation table, but also includes instructions to Duxbury to look in the translation table for Nemeth code when something is marked as math or technical material. A template also includes a set of DBT styles, including the definitions of those styles. So the BANA template, any BANA template has a set of Duxbury styles that give instructions that correspond to the BANA formatting rules. A template also includes a file that tells Duxbury which Duxbury styles and some codes to use that correspond to Word styles. So if you were to import a Word document, the template includes information about what Duxbury is going to give you based on what that Word file was. And more. There's always more to be packed into a template because it depends on which template you're using, how broad the instructions that are given to Duxbury about the skeleton are. Most of the time, we're transcribing according to the same code and according to the same formatting guidelines all the time. So most of my transcriptions use the UEB, the English, parentheses, UEB hyphen BANA template. So I have it set as my default template. When that little pop-up window comes up, it is by default, it has highlighted the template English UEB BANA. You can set a default template by opening a new file. And when you get that pop-up window, you highlight the template you want to be your default, whichever one that is based on what Braille you're translating according to what code and what formatting guidelines. Then check the box that says mark template as default and hit OK. The next time you go to import a print document, or the next time you go to create a new Duxbury file, that template is already going to be highlighted and you can probably just hit OK because that's the one you're usually working in. Real quick, our help files, the documentation is available in the program under the help drop-down menu. Help topics, that first option is the most direct way to get there. The full documentation file for Duxbury is also available online. Getting that help online makes it really easy to bookmark and revisit the relevant information, maybe like the DBT Codes Quick Reference list. Potentially, you can find Duxbury documentation for versions other than the most recent by simply changing the numbers in the link for the help file online. Your in-program help is always going to give you the help for that version of Duxbury. If you go online, you could look at multiple versions worth of Duxbury help. But how do you know which version of Duxbury you have? So it's just in the help dropdown. That last option says about DBT. You click on that, and the little box that pops up, the very first line is your version of Duxbury, including the service release information. So that's the SR number. We're going to skip our last poll and go right to our most actionable item, the BRF setting. This is going to let you look at a Braille ready file, a sort of finished product Braille file, exactly as the person who saved it as a finished product saw it. Under our global drop-down menu, the last option is Formatted Braille Importer. When you click on that, you get this pop-up box that looks like it has a whole bunch of options, but really, we just want that first checkbox next to Read Formatted Braille Without Interpretation to be checked. Because 98% of the time, when you open a BRF, you want to see exactly the spacing and line breaks and page breaks of Braille that the person who created this Braille ready file saw. If this box is not checked, then Duxbury will try to look at the BRF and where things sort of fall on the page and apply styles and coding based on what it thinks those pieces are. So it's going to try to interpret the BRF for us. Now we know the BRF is very simple and doesn't have those instructions to Duxbury that help to interpret what pieces are. So that interpretation is usually not helpful and really makes us see a different Braille file than the person who maybe sent us the Braille file is seeing. And that's why anytime we're going to open a BRF, we want to make sure that our formatted Braille importer has this setting checked. Read formatted Braille without interpretation. And on that note, I simply wish you happy quacking as you Duxbury Braille Translator and go forth and make lots of really efficient, excellent quality Braille. So, you know, the last Monday of February, we're going to be doing another webinar. My friend William Freeman and I are going to get together to talk a little bit about how Braille works electronically. And we're going to talk more about ASCII and a little bit about refreshable Braille displays and some of the foundations sort of how Braille works electronically. That's on February 28th from 12 to 1.
Kyle, I just have to say thank you so very much. You have lots of thank yous in the chat, and I look forward to the next set of webinars that you are doing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.